Welcome, listeners, to the Stories Fables Ghostly Tales podcast, your one place for the macabre and creepy. Join me tonight for something ghastly and spooky. Today's episode is a story by Reddit user RocketTrashPranda87. What a brilliant name. Who is kind enough to share their story with me, and I decided to include it in this week's spooky and paranormal lineup. The title of this story is My 200-Year-Old Victorian House and My Hauntings. Thank you again, RocketTrashPranda87, for sending this in. I also have a lovely listener, Eljima, who has hopped onto BuzzFeed and left me a lovely review, helping me get closer to BuzzFeed's 2018 podcast list. If you're interested in helping the podcast out, hopping over there and leaving a comment puts me into the running to include this channel in their podcast post, which would be awesome, and I appreciate all the support I can get. But seeing as I went through this yesterday, I think popping it in the episode notes is enough for now. So without keeping you waiting, turn the lights off, the sound up, and get ready for something spooky. I live in a 200-year-old Victorian house just outside of Philadelphia, and ever since we moved in, back in 1996, weird things would happen around the house. I remember being a kid laying in my bunk beds, and in the middle of the night, feeling something sitting on the edge of my bed. I mean, noticeably enough that you could feel pressure on the mattress and even feel my feet or legs hit something physical sitting there. Mind you, this would happen at night before I fell asleep, and my bedroom door would be shut, and my bed faced the door at all times. No one came into that room, and I never heard a sound in terms of footsteps. My sister that lived on the third floor would constantly say she heard someone walking around in the hallway up there at night, and that there were weird things going on with electronics inside the house. I specifically remember getting a pretty kick-ass new stereo for Christmas, probably around the time when I was in 7th, 8th grade, and in the middle of the night, the stereo turned on and went to max volume, waking me up and my dad, who immediately came storming into the room screaming at me for having my stereo on that loud. At which point, being absolutely confused and too scared to say, "Hey, it did it itself," I just turned the radio off and laid back down in bed, only to have it happen again 10 minutes later. There was no sleep timer or auto wake-up mode or anything like that on the system, so a bunch of just awkward and odd occurrences, but there is something to take into account. Well, my sister and my mum were at least open in terms of talking about this kind of stuff, but my other sister and dad viewed the whole thing as a joke. I can't tell you how many times my sister would go to my dad explaining how something crazy happened, and he would just tune it out or laugh, and just call us crazy. That is, however, until something happened to him that he never explained. To this day, I have no idea what changed his opinion on the whole thing. I just know the awkward conversation that I had with him went something like this. My dad: "So, you and your sisters think the house is haunted, huh?" Me: "Yeah, I mean, some weird things have happened that we can't explain." "Like what, again?" I then explained everything that I could recall off the top of my head. "Interesting. Yeah, I guess I could see how you would think that. Did something happen to you?" And that's when my dad stares at me, kind of blankly, and just walks away. I never found out what happened to him, but out of all the occurrences, the one that sticks in my memory the most, and still creeps me out to this day, happened to me when I was home alone. My mum passed away 5 years ago from cancer. My sisters have since moved out, and it was just me and my dad living at home. He started seeing someone else, so it basically left me home alone all the time, which, like I said, a 200-year-old Victorian house is a pretty damn big house for one person. I had since moved to the 3rd floor, which is pretty much like a small apartment. One night I was watching Zero Dark 30, and it was about 2:45ish AM. I started hearing talking coming from somewhere in or outside the house. I turned down the volume on the TV, thinking maybe it was coming from outside. And after I couldn't pinpoint it, I got up and looked out my windows and could not see anyone out there. I went back to my bed and laid down and left the volume on mute and continued to listen. I could make out that it was a male and female voice. I brushed it off to my dad coming home with his friend, and they were just downstairs talking after a night at the bar. Then it struck me that my dog did not go batshit crazy when she heard the front door open, which she does literally every time. Furthermore, she could be dead asleep under a bed with headphones on and she would hear that damn door open and proceed to bark until that person petted her. That aside, I got up and looked out the windows again and did not see his car anywhere. Now this is where I started getting a little anxious, so I crept close to my door and could confirm the voices were coming from downstairs in my house. I grabbed a bat I kept next to my bed and started walking downstairs. The spiral staircase put me in the hallway where the lights were on. I moved through the hallway to see every light was on in every room on the 2nd floor. I yelled my dad's name and didn't hear a reply. I continued on through the 2nd floor to the 1st floor staircase, where at that point I could still hear talking, but it was still inaudible in terms of making out the conversation. As soon as my feet hit the top step of the staircase, it went quiet. Every light was on downstairs, as well as both doors were locked. I quickly turned off every light, double and triple checked the locks, and hit the lights on the 2nd floor and ran back up to the 3rd floor, slamming the door and jumping back into bed. This was different than the other things I had experienced before inside the house. My dogs were both in my room just staring at the door, almost in a somewhat cowering position. And this was super weird, considering that these dogs think they are 10 times bigger than they are, and usually don't back down to anything or anyone. I decided that, hey, maybe I left the lights on before I came up to bed, even though I didn't, and hell knew I hadn't stepped foot in either my dad's room or my sister's room in days, and the lights had been off. And maybe the voices were just coming from outside, even though every window was shut, and I had already looked outside and confirmed no one was out there. So, I decided to head back to the couch and put back on the movie. Then, the yelling started. It sounded like a male and female yelling at each other, or arguing heavily. Not by the words they were using, but because they were still pretty much inaudible. The sounds I could detect were more about the tones in their inaudible words that they were using with each other. I muted the TV again and just listened. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew 100% I did not know the male by the way he sounded. But the female, I knew. It sounded like my mum. I don't know if it was just something that I wanted to hear, or if my brain just automatically made the comparison because I wanted to hear her voice again. But at that exact moment, I was thoroughly convinced. I stood up and took a step outside my door and saw the light was on in the hallway. I slowly walked down the steps, and I saw the lights on in the bedrooms. I turned around and walked back upstairs, mainly because I did not want to confirm what I knew in the back of my head, and just sat down on the edge of my bed and just listened. I called my mum's cell phone, which we still had service with, to hear her voicemail to reconfirm her voice. I know that sounds terrible, but time sucks, and it's scary the things you start to forget. I knew it deep down that it was her voice. I just stared at my door listening for minutes on end. Since that day, my dad has moved out and I currently rent the house with my girlfriend and my best friend. So it's kind of a running joke that, oh, the house is haunted, which absolutely terrifies my girlfriend. Nothing as extensive as the story above has happened since then. I have, though, had a security camera pick up a coffee cup rotating on the table in my living room, while at the same time, a visible indentation on the sofa appeared for about 1 second. I feel foolish for even mentioning that because I can't back it up with video, since it was when I first installed my security cameras and was not familiar with the software, leading to me not knowing that the footage would delete itself after 7 days. My roommate also saw something strange. The TV on, out back in my garage, which was the pool house, at which point he grabbed his phone to call me to ask if I was out back at the time, and I most certainly wasn't. He is a big dude, and the second he started walking out back to check on the room to see if someone was in there, the TV went out, and the room was completely dark. We both approached the garage from both entry doors, and no one could have gotten out. Yet, no one was inside. I mean, I also could confirm the TV was on in the back room by an exterior camera on the back of my house, picking up the pool house being lit up on the inside. It's just weird. So many things over so many years that I just can't make sense of. And that concludes my paranormal account. Thank you for listening. Yikes, those hauntings range from intense to strange, then to eerie. I hope that house has settled down, mate. And thank you so much for this very personal account. And if any of you lovely listeners have paranormal accounts and stories of your own, feel free to send them to StoriesFablesGhostlyTales@gmail.com, and I'd be glad to feature them on my show. Tomorrow, my lovely listeners, I have a creepypasta ghost story just for you. And let me just say, it's not your average creepypasta story, and definitely takes on a whole new path when it comes to the average ghost story. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all then. And on that note, it is that time. This is the place where stories live, and you tale tellers come to listen. Enjoy your day or night, and join me every weekday for our creepy tradition. And as always, till next time.